Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Right now, somewhere in the United States, a person who cannot move their hands is controlling a computer cursor. Not with a mouse, not with voice commands, but purely with their thoughts. That is not science fiction. That is happening today. Today, we're breaking down Neuralink, specifically what the technology actually does under the hood, what the real safety and ethical risks are that don't always make the headlines, and where brain-computer interfaces are headed next. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear picture of what's been proven, what's still uncertain, and why this moment in neuroscience matters way beyond one company. I've got someone here who has been deep in the weeds on all of this, so let's get into it. What is Neuralink actually building, and why has it taken this long to get here?
So at its core, Neuralink is building what's classified as a Class 3 medical device, which is the highest risk category the FDA has, called a brain-computer interface, or BCI. The specific device is called the N1 implant, and it's a coin-sized unit that sits in a small disc-shaped cutout in the skull. From that chip, 1,000 ultra-thin threads, each about a quarter the diameter of a human hair, are threaded into the brain and connect to neurons.
Wait, a quarter the diameter of a human hair? That is incredibly small.
Right, and that precision is actually one of Neuralink's core engineering achievements. The N1 has 1,024 electrodes distributed across 64 of those polymer threads, and they're inserted by a purpose-built surgical robot called the R1, which places them with what they describe as sub-micron precision to minimize tissue damage. The whole thing communicates wirelessly, no wires poking through the skin, and it charges wirelessly through the scalp, kind of like how you'd charge a phone.
So it's essentially a Bluetooth chip in your brain.
That's actually a pretty accurate way to put it. According to a piece by David Tuffley, a senior lecturer in applied ethics and cybersecurity at Griffith University, the device connects the brain to an external computer via a Bluetooth signal, enabling continuous communication back and forth. And Neuralink's stated mission is to, quote, create a generalized brain interface to restore autonomy to those with unmet medical needs today and unlock human potential tomorrow.
That's a big mission statement. But getting from mission statement to actually putting this in a human being, that road was not smooth, right?
Not at all. Neuralink was founded in 2016, and between 2018 and 2022, it raised over $500 million refining its technology. But when it applied to the FDA in early 2022 to begin human trials, it was rejected. The FDA had a list of specific concerns: the lithium battery inside the device, the possibility of the implant's wires migrating to other parts of the brain, and the potential damage to brain tissue if the device ever needed to be removed.
Wire migration, that sounds genuinely alarming. Like, the wires could just move?
That was the concern, yeah. And it took over a year to address those issues. On May 25th, 2023, Neuralink finally received FDA approval for its first human clinical trial. The formal study is called the PRIME study, Precise Robotically Implanted Brain-Computer Interface, and it's registered on clinicaltrials.gov. The study is targeting people with tetraplegia, tetraparesis, cervical spinal cord injuries, and ALS, with clinical sites at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix and the University of Miami.
And the first human implant happened in January 2024?
January 2024, yes. And what's remarkable is how fast things have moved since then. By September 2025, according to the Tsorb Clinical Trials Tracker, 12 people worldwide had received implants. As of January 28, 2026, that number had grown to 21 participants across all PRIME variants globally.
21 people. And what are those participants actually able to do with the device?
Multiple participants have reached 8 to 10 bits per second of cursor control. And to put that in context, that's comparable to an able-bodied person using a standard computer mouse. So these are people who cannot use their hands, controlling a cursor at the speed of a typical mouse user. That's the headline result.
That is genuinely remarkable. And I think that's the part that gets lost sometimes in the broader conversation about Neuralink. Like, there are real people whose lives are being changed here.
Exactly. And the potential applications go well beyond cursor control. According to Tuffley's analysis, Neuralink's technology could enable precise control of prosthetic limbs, revolutionize treatment for Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and spinal cord injuries, and there's even some early promise for conditions like depression, schizophrenia, and tinnitus. That's a wide spectrum.
Okay, but I want to push back a little here because Neuralink has also been criticized for being very secretive about its data. Like, for a company making these kinds of claims, where's the independent verification?
That's a fair and important challenge. And actually, this is where things got interesting in late 2025. Neuralink submitted its first human clinical data to the New England Journal of Medicine for peer review. The paper covers the results from the first 3 patients implanted with the device, including safety outcomes. This was reported by The Debrief in October 2025, and Bloomberg first broke the news of the submission.
The New England Journal of Medicine, that's about as prestigious as it gets in medicine.
It really is. And the significance of that submission is huge. Florian Sulzbacher, the co-founder of BlackRock Neurotech, which is a competitor in this space, told the debrief, quote, "Transparency and independent evaluation are essential for building public trust and accelerating progress across the field." He also noted that BlackRock's technology has supported more than 50 chronic human implants, some exceeding a decade of use, with safety and performance data published through academic collaborations over nearly 20 years. His point was essentially, this is the standard, and it's good to see Neuralink joining it.
So even a competitor is welcoming the scrutiny.
He literally said, quote, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And Michael Lawton, the president and CEO of the Barrow Neurological Institute, which is one of Neuralink's own clinical trial sites, said they've been very meticulous about focusing on diseased patients with disability. But he also added that a broader application for the device remains, quote, "a long way from becoming available." So even the people closest to the project are being measured about the timeline.
That's actually a really grounding thing to hear because I think the hype cycle around Neuralink can make it feel like we're 6 months away from everyone having a brain chip.
And that gap between hype and reality is exactly where the ethical risks live. There's a 2024 literature review published in the journal Curious, it's in PubMed, that systematically examined the ethical issues around BCIs. The authors flagged 5 core concerns: safety, autonomy, privacy, accountability, and personal identity. And those aren't abstract philosophy questions. They're practical problems that need regulatory answers before this technology scales.
Let's unpack those. Safety is obvious. We talked about the FDA's concerns. But privacy? What does privacy even mean when we're talking about a brain implant?
So a BCI is, by definition, reading your neural signals. And the question becomes, who owns that data? If the device is connected wirelessly to an external computer, that data is traveling somewhere. A paper from Stony Brook University on BCI ethics put it plainly: as BCIs are directly connected to a human body part, ensuring their safety becomes paramount to protect users from potential physical and psychological harm. But the privacy dimension is that your neural data could, in theory, reveal your intentions, your emotional states, things you haven't chosen to communicate.
That's actually kind of unsettling when you say it out loud.
It should be. And then there's the personal identity question, which is the one I find most philosophically interesting. If a device is continuously modulating your brain activity, stimulating certain regions, suppressing others, at what point does that start to affect who you are? Your preferences, your decisions, your sense of self? These aren't hypotheticals. They're questions the bioethics community is actively wrestling with.
And the accountability piece, like if something goes wrong, who's responsible? The company? The surgeon? The algorithm?
Exactly, and that's a genuinely unresolved legal and regulatory question. The Curious Review flagged it specifically, and it's compounded by the fact that BCIs are increasingly being integrated with AI. There's a Springer paper on this from 2025 that looks at the ethical risks of combining BCI and AI technologies. When an AI is making real-time decisions based on your neural signals, the accountability chain gets very complicated, very fast.
Okay, I want to zoom out for a second because I think there's a tendency to treat Neuralink as if it's the only player in this space. But it's not, right?
Not at all. The BCI market is currently valued at $2.94 billion and growing at a 16.8% compound annual growth rate, according to market analysis from Subconscious Mind. Neuralink is the most visible company, but there's also Synchron, led by CEO Tom Oxley, and Precision Neuroscience, led by Ben Rappaport. And then there's a whole wave of research happening in academic settings that's pushing the field in directions Neuralink isn't even focused on.
Like what? What's happening in the research world that people might not know about?
So there are 2 recent findings that I think are genuinely underreported. The first is from a University of Bath study published in June 2026. Researchers developed a wearable BCI headset, not implanted, just worn, that can detect hidden consciousness in patients who appear to be unresponsive after severe brain injuries. Historical estimates suggest that up to 40% of patients categorized as minimally conscious are actually misdiagnosed as entirely unaware.
Wait, 40%? So nearly half of patients who doctors think are unaware might actually be conscious?
That's what the research suggests. And the BCI headset, by training patients over multiple sessions to modulate their own brain signals, nearly doubled the clinical detection rate of minimally conscious states, from 39% to 69%. That's not a marginal improvement. That's potentially identifying consciousness in patients who would otherwise be written off.
That's one of those findings that just stops you in your tracks. Like the implications for end of life care, for families making decisions, that's enormous.
Completely. And the second finding is from a research team led by Giacomo Valle, an assistant professor at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. His team published a review in Nature Reviews Bioengineering in June 2026 that compared the BCI architectures used for restoring vision and restoring touch, and found that despite 50 years of completely separate development, the underlying hardware algorithms, electrode configurations, and cortical stimulation patterns are functionally identical.
50 years of separate research and they were basically doing the same thing the whole time?
Valle put it really well. He said, quote, "Natural vision and touch both collect complex information from the external world and convert it into electrical signals that the brain can understand. The engineering challenges are therefore remarkably similar. And the practical implication is that a breakthrough in restoring vision now instantly accelerates the work on restoring touch, and vice versa. These fields that never talk to each other are now going to start sharing everything."
That's kind of a beautiful scientific irony, decades of siloed work, and it turns out the solution was the same all along.
And it's not just vision and touch. A 2026 review in Frontiers in Rehabilitation Sciences looked at BCI applications across stroke, multiple sclerosis, ALS, spinal cord injury, Parkinson's disease, and cerebral palsy, and noted that neurological disorders are the second leading cause of global mortality. The potential patient population for this technology is massive, but the review also flagged real limitations: small sample sizes, inconsistent protocols across studies, and very limited long-term evidence.
So the science is promising, but still early.
That's the honest summary. And a 2026 clinical review in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience made the point that while BCIs have seen rapid growth since the term was coined by Vidal in 1973, clinician knowledge about the technology remains low. As commercial availability rises, there's a real gap between what the technology can do and what the medical community is prepared to implement.
That's a gap that could have real consequences for patients.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons the peer review process for Neuralink's NEJM submission matters so much. If that paper gets published, it doesn't just validate Neuralink's data, it puts the information in front of the clinical community in a format they can actually use and critique.
Let me ask you something that I think a lot of people are quietly wondering. Is Neuralink moving too fast? Like, is the pace of this driven by science or by Elon Musk's ambition?
That's the central tension, and I don't think there's a clean answer. On one hand, Neuralink's clinical program has achieved more milestones in the past 18 months than most neurotechnology companies achieve in a decade. That's from the subconscious mind analysis. On the other hand, the FDA rejected Neuralink's first application in 2022 precisely because the company was pushing before the safety questions were resolved. And the U.S. Office of the Inspector General launched an investigation into Neuralink over potential animal welfare violations before the FDA approval came through.
Animal welfare violations, that's something that didn't get a ton of coverage.
It was reported by The Conversation in their coverage of the FDA approval. The investigation was launched less than 6 months before Neuralink received approval to begin human trials. So there's a legitimate question about whether the regulatory process moved fast enough, or whether the pressure from a high-profile founder accelerated timelines in ways that deserve scrutiny.
And yet, 21 people have now received implants, and the data is going to the New England Journal of Medicine. So it's not like nothing is working.
Right, and that's the complexity of this story. The technology is producing real results for real patients with severe disabilities. The peer review process is now being engaged, international expansion to the UAE and UK is underway, but the ethical framework, the regulatory clarity, the long-term safety data, those are all still being built in real time, alongside the technology itself.
It's like building the plane while flying it.
With someone's brain as the runway, yeah. And that's not a comfortable position for anyone, not for patients, not for regulators, not for the scientific community. But it's also not unprecedented. A lot of transformative medical technologies have had this kind of messy, contested early period.
So when you step back from all of this, the 21 participants, the NEJM submission, the ethical debates, the convergence of vision and touch research, what does this really come down to?
Here's what I think it comes down to. Neuralink is the most visible face of a much larger shift in how we think about the relationship between the brain and technology. The N1 chip with its 1024 electrodes, the R1 surgical robot, the wireless charging, those are engineering achievements. But the deeper story is that BCIs are moving from research labs into clinical reality across multiple companies and academic institutions simultaneously. And the questions that raises about privacy, identity, accountability, access, those are questions that belong to all of us, not just to neuroscientists.
And the fact that Neuralink is now submitting to peer review, that feels like a turning point.
It's the moment where the company stops being just a story about Elon Musk's ambitions and starts being a story about verifiable science. Whether the NEJM publishes that paper and what the independent scientific community says when they see the data, that's going to tell us a lot about where this technology actually stands.
And in the meantime, there are people with spinal cord injuries and ALS who are controlling computers with their thoughts at the speed of a regular mouse user. That's the reality right now.
That's the reality. And for those 21 participants, this isn't a philosophical debate, it's their daily life. That's worth keeping front and center in any conversation about the risks and the hype.
Absolutely. So here's where we land. Neuralink built a coin-sized chip with 1,000 hair-thin threads that a robot surgically places in the brain with sub-micron precision. It took years of FDA pushback to get to human trials, and now 21 people globally are using it, with some achieving cursor control comparable to an able-bodied mouse user. The peer review process is finally underway. The ethical questions around privacy, identity, and accountability are real and unresolved. And the broader BCI field is accelerating in ways that go far beyond any single company.
And the convergence finding from Chalmers University is the one I'd leave people with. The idea that 50 years of siloed research into restoring vision and restoring touch were essentially solving the same problem, and that realizing that could shave years off the timeline for helping millions of patients, that's the kind of scientific moment that doesn't get enough attention.
Here's the thing that I keep coming back to. We started this episode with a person controlling a cursor using only their thoughts. That image felt like science fiction. But the harder question, the one that's going to define the next decade of this technology, isn't whether it works. It's who gets to decide how it's used, who has access to it, and who's watching the data it generates. Those aren't engineering problems. They're human ones. Thanks for being here on Copilot Podcasts, and the next time someone tells you brain chips are just hype, you'll know exactly what to say.